The air in downtown Manhattan cracked with tension as billionaire Elias Thorne, a man whose smile held the cutting edge of $1,000 suit, spotted the woman huddled on his corporate steps. Kehlani Jenkins, 28, invisible to the world for a year after a catastrophic career crash, was suddenly thrust into the spotlight of his cruel amusement. Mocking the grime on her jacket and the desperation in her eyes, Thorne pointed to his sleek, multi-million-dollar helicopter, a beast of carbon fiber and glass, and announced to his snickering entourage, "Fly this chopper, and I'll marry you." It was meant to be a viral humiliation, the ultimate corporate joke built on contempt and casual racism. But when Kehlani finally stood up, brushing the dirt from her worn clothes and letting the cold light catch a fierce, unsettling determination in her dark eyes, the CEO quickly realized his reckless dare was about to unleash a past far more shocking and far more dangerous than he could ever imagine. Kehlani Jenkins was 28 years old, a woman whose life had taken a brutally sharp dive from the highest heights of achievement to the lowest depths of the street. She was sitting on the cold stone steps of the Thorne Tower Plaza in downtown San Francisco, her backpack her only possession, the sound of the morning rush hour a dull roar around her. She wasn't begging. She was just trying to feel the sun, trying to warm away the persistent chill of sleeping outside. She looked nothing like the highly decorated military aviation engineer she used to be. The massive glass doors of the tower hissed open, and the entire plaza seemed to inhale a collective gasp of polished air. Out strode Elias Thorne, the CEO of Thorne Aeronautics, a man so rich and arrogant he seemed to generate his own spotlight. He was talking loudly on a sleek silver phone, a perfect suit draped over his impossibly fit frame, entirely unaware of the invisible force field of resentment he created as he walked. His expression was a permanent sneer of impatience. Elias stopped 20 feet from Kehlani, gesturing dismissively to a massive, gleaming black helicopter that was slowly descending onto the private, rooftop helipad above them. The rotors chopped the air with an expensive, confident rhythm. He looked down at Kehlani, his eyes skimming over her frayed jeans and muddy sneakers, a look of profound, casual disgust settling on his face. He cut off his phone call, enjoying the sudden silence of his staff gathering around him. "You know what?" Elias's voice boomed, carrying easily across the hushed plaza, drawing the attention of dozens of commuters and employees. He pointed a manicured finger at the towering skyscraper and then toward Kehlani's worn-out face. The cruelty in his voice was thick, a public, theatrical humiliation designed purely for his own amusement and for the benefit of his sycophantic staff. "Tell you what, lady, I'm feeling generous this morning." He folded his arms, the action tightening the expensive fabric of his jacket. The look in his eyes was pure, unadulterated mockery, a calculated public spectacle. He paused, letting the silence hang heavy, savoring the shock and pity on the faces of the onlookers. His lips curled into a nasty, predatory smile before he delivered the crushing final line of his performance. The crowd held its breath, waiting for the punchline of his awful joke, not realizing the bomb that was about to drop. "Fly that chopper to the top of the adjacent tower, and I'll marry you. Right here, right now," he declared, the words hanging in the air like a noxious cloud. His staff laughed nervously, dismissing it as a ridiculous dare to a helpless, dirty woman. The insult was clear, designed to remind Kehlani of everything she had lost and everything she would never be again. He turned to walk away, his back already to her. Kehlani's shoulders had been slumped in defeat, her eyes fixed on the pavement. The humiliation was a physical pain, sharp and immediate, reminding her that she was nothing more than garbage to these people. But as she heard the mocking laughter fade, something snapped deep within her, a coil of dormant pride and sheer, unyielding rage. Her hands clenched into fists, the fingernails biting hard into the skin of her palms. She slowly stood up, her movement deliberate and smooth, contrasting sharply with her appearance. Her head lifted, and her eyes, the same intense, intelligent shade of brown that had once navigated her through desert sandstorms, locked onto Elias Thorne's retreating back. She ignored the stares, the whispers, the sheer absurdity of the moment, focusing only on the challenge and the glimmer of a dangerous opportunity. Kehlani's voice, when it came, was low, steady, and utterly void of the desperation they expected, cutting through the plaza noise with the terrifying clarity of a command. Every person present froze, including Elias Thorne, who stopped mid-stride, turning back slowly, his smug expression finally cracking into genuine surprise and a hint of something that looked like fear. The helicopter blades whirred overhead. "I accept," she stated simply, pulling the strap of her battered backpack tighter across her chest. "But you should know, Mr. Thorne, I don't need your money or your name. All I need is that cockpit." Her words were a chilling promise of the chaos and reckoning that was about to be unleashed. The plaza was silent, shattered by Kehlani's single word. Elias Thorne's face, usually a mask of detached arrogance, was a study in confusion and disbelief. Before he could speak, his head of security, a large, uneasy man named Hector, was already moving to escort Kehlani toward the tower entrance. Elias simply stared, processing the unexpected deviation from his cruel script. He motioned to his assistant to follow and document everything, convinced he was about to expose a grand, theatrical hoax. As Kehlani walked through the polished, marble lobby, a space she had only ever looked at from the outside, a strange sense of displacement washed over her. She was a ghost in a place she was never meant to occupy. Hector, clearly uncomfortable, led her to a private executive lounge, granting her access to a restroom so opulent it felt unreal. The running tap water sounded like a waterfall of diamonds. She caught her own reflection in the enormous mirror above the basin and paused. The dirt and exhaustion of the past year were evident, but beneath the weariness was the bone structure of a determined soldier. As she scrubbed the grime from her hands and face, she saw, briefly, the woman she used to be, Captain Kehlani Jenkins, the youngest black female pilot to achieve the rank of commander in her elite unit. She was a genius in the sky. This brief moment of clarity, a less extreme event of self-recognition, was powerful but fleeting. The woman in the mirror was confident, sure of her purpose, and respected. Now, Kehlani was just a threat, a joke, a symbol of public failure. She pushed the memories down, focusing only on the mechanics of the task ahead. She knew that any hesitation now would be catastrophic, and she could not afford to fail this ridiculous dare. The feeling of the expensive, plush towel drying her hands triggered a much darker, more intense memory. It wasn't the reflection that haunted her, but the crushing, deafening sound of metal tearing apart at high velocity. The memory was an intrusive, full-sensory nightmare that brought her to her knees in the sterile, silent bathroom. She could smell the smoke and the fuel again. The extreme event flooded her mind, the final, catastrophic flight a little over a year ago. It was supposed to be a routine field test for a new piece of experimental avionics gear, but less than an hour into the mission, everything went silent. The controls seized, alarms shrieked, and the chopper tumbled out of the sky. Kehlani had fought the controls, her training screaming at her to regain stability, but a critical system failure, one that shouldn't have been possible, had sealed their fate. She remembered the agonizing impact, the darkness, and the agonizing guilt that she was the only one who had walked away, albeit with a broken body and a ruined career. The subsequent investigation had labeled the crash pilot error, destroying her reputation and any chance of a stable life. She couldn't shake the memory of the investigators' cold, dismissive glare. Elias, waiting outside with the agitated Hector, was growing impatient. He tapped his foot, looking at his watch, ready to call the whole thing off and go back to his scheduled day of meetings and dismissals. He was sure the woman was either insane or planning to expose herself as a fraud. He opened his mouth to order Hector to remove her, but the pilot's voice came over the intercom from the helipad, reporting that the chopper was now ready. The pilot's voice brought Kehlani back to the present. Kelani took a deep, shuddering breath, her eyes suddenly steel-hard. She straightened her posture, the memory of her military precision returning like muscle memory. She didn't have time for trauma or reflection. She had a job to do, a humiliating dare to win. She left the pristine restroom and faced Elias Thorne, no longer a homeless woman, but a commander on a mission. The challenge was stupid, but the stakes were suddenly very, very real. Elias Thorne led Kelani onto the elevator, which shot up 75 floors in seconds, the sensation making her stomach flip, not from fear, but from the sheer, unsettling acceleration. The less extreme event was the brief, silent ride. Elias stood far from her, his initial arrogance returning, masked by a thin layer of professional curiosity. He still didn't believe she was anything but a talented actress. He just wanted to see her failure firsthand. The elevator opened directly onto the rooftop helipad, a vast, windy space high above the city, feeling like the top of the world. The sleek, black Sikorsky S-76 helicopter sat waiting, its engine idling with a low, powerful growl. The exposed setting, the height, and the powerful machine felt familiar to Kelani, stirring deep, primal instincts. This was her element, her territory, a space she truly understood. She walked toward the machine with a renewed purpose, the wind whipping her hair around her face. Elias and his small entourage stayed back, huddled near the glass-enclosed waiting area, watching her every move. She paused at the base of the machine, laying a reverent hand on the cool metal fuselage, an old love affair reigniting in a burst of kinetic energy. The aircraft was beautiful, expensive, and deadly if handled improperly. Kelani performed a quick, almost unconscious pre-flight check, her hands moving with an practiced grace that belied her rough appearance. She ran her fingers over the rotor blades, checking the tension and balance, her eyes scanning the hydraulics. This less extreme event was a moment of true expertise. She wasn't just looking at the chopper. She was assessing its soul, its readiness for flight. She was measuring its capabilities against her own. Her movements were slow and deliberate, a careful dance between an engineer and her machine. She could feel Elias's skeptical eyes burning into her back, waiting for her to falter, waiting for her to prove she was a fake. But as she moved to the tail boom, checking the stability and the condition of the anti-torque system, her expertise became a palpable force, silencing the whispers from the waiting group. She moved around the tail, focusing on the intricate mechanisms that kept the aircraft balanced. That's when she saw it. Tucked away beneath a protective covering, where only a trained eye with an intimate knowledge of helicopter design would ever look, was a crucial, almost invisible problem. The less extreme event of the detailed check suddenly turned urgent, sparking a jolt of genuine fear in her stomach. The extreme event occurred when Kelani realized the severity of the problem. A small, almost imperceptible stress fracture was beginning to form on a critical mount point near the tail rotor pitch change link. It was a time bomb. She knew that any high-speed maneuver or sudden change in wind shear would cause the entire link to fail, sending the chopper spiraling to the ground. She straightened up, her eyes narrowing. She walked quickly back to the glass observation lounge, ignoring the engine noise and the strong wind. She stopped right in front of Elias, her expression intense and serious, stripping away all the mockery and condescension from the morning's exchange. The silence of the moment, broken only by the engine's idling, was terrifyingly loud. She did not raise her voice. She spoke with the cold, undeniable authority of a technical expert delivering a fatal diagnosis. "Mr. Thorne," Kelani stated, her voice calm but tight, "the chopper has a major structural failure in the tail boom. If I fly this, we both die." She leaned in just slightly, her eyes boring into his. "It's not sabotage. It's a critical design flaw waiting to tear that chopper apart mid-flight. Tell me, Mr. Thorne, who built this machine?" Elias Thorne was frozen, the color draining from his face as Kelani delivered the grim news. Her voice had none of the hysteria he expected. It held the terrifying certainty of cold mathematics. He knew, instinctively, that she was telling the truth, that this wasn't an elaborate stalling tactic. The less extreme event was his staff scrambling to contact the maintenance team, their faces panicked. Elias, however, just stared at Kelani, his mind racing. He waved his staff away, a silent command for privacy. The shock of the potential danger had momentarily overridden his arrogance. "How did you know that?" The last inspection report was filed 3 days ago, and it showed clean integrity, he demanded, his voice low and tight with force control. He needed to understand this sudden expertise, this uncanny knowledge that contradicted all his expensive safeguards. Kaylani didn't flinch. She kept her gaze steady, choosing her next words carefully. This was a fragile moment, a chance to build credibility, but revealing too much of her past would expose her to dangers far greater than Elias's mocking dare. The less extreme event was her measured response, revealing just enough of her history to satisfy his immediate curiosity and confirm her credentials. "I didn't just fly machines like this, Mr. Thorne," she explained, her lips barely moving. "I designed the flight control interface for several next-generation rotorcraft platforms. I know the weak points of this entire line of choppers because I helped fix them, and sometimes I helped create them." She paused, letting the statement sink in, realizing how distant that life felt now. Her explanation brought a distant, painful memory to the surface. A happy day spent in the hangar with her father. He was a mechanical genius, her first co-pilot, and the man who taught her the importance of never trusting a machine until you understood every bolt. She could almost hear his booming laugh over the roar of a jet engine, a deeply emotional contrast to the current cold reality. The memory quickly turned dark, transforming into the extreme event of her betrayal. Kaylani had trusted her colleague, a man named Sterling Vance, with the final specs of the experimental avionics system, the one that ultimately failed. Sterling was her mentor, a celebrated engineer who seemed like family. He had access to everything, including the flight path and the maintenance logs. She remembered the last conversation they had before the crash. Sterling, looking unusually tense, wishing her luck but avoiding eye contact. She later found out he had taken a large, unexplained payoff shortly after she was discharged from the hospital. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place slowly, cruelly, over the following months, a betrayal that shattered her career and her faith in humanity. The extreme event wasn't just the crash. It was the realization that Sterling had either manipulated the logs or, worse, deliberately weakened the structure to make the system failure look more catastrophic, all to cover up his own technical incompetence or, more likely, a secret business deal. This betrayal cost her reputation, her future, and indirectly, her ability to protect the most important person in her life. Elias, momentarily forgetting the chopper's flaw, looked at her intense expression and knew there was a deep, personal pain tied to her expertise. He saw a glimmer of the ruthless intensity that mirrored his own ambition, but hers was fueled by something much purer, revenge for a devastating heartbreak. He realized he needed to know more about this man, Sterling Vance. Elias Thorne quickly abandoned the idea of flying and ordered the chopper grounded for inspection. He didn't thank Kaylani. Instead, he simply ordered his assistant to arrange for her immediate accommodation and transportation, then retreated to his exclusive penthouse office. The confrontation and the chillingly accurate prediction of failure had shaken him more than he let on. His first action was to start a high-level background check, not just on Kaylani, but on the name Sterling Vance. He used his private security networks, bypassing public databases, but the result was frustratingly similar to Kaylani's own experience. The files were sealed, fragmented, and contradictory, especially anything relating to Kaylani's military service. It was a digital dead end. This less extreme event of the research blockade intensified Elias's inherent cynicism. He remembered a painful time that fueled his own ruthless business practices, the year his parents divorced. He was just a teenager when his father, a proud but flawed entrepreneur, lost the majority share of his avionics company after a messy, public fallout with his business partner. Elias watched his father's pride crumble, leaving behind a bitter, suspicious man. The divorce itself was a low point, a family drama played out in expensive courtrooms. His father's pride, his mother's cold demands, and the endless stream of lawyers. The result was Elias's hardened belief that every relationship, every partnership, and every promise was ultimately transactional and disposable. That betrayal had forged him into the distrustful man Kelani had met on the plaza steps. He stared out at the city skyline, the towers looking like cold, indifferent tombstones to his past. He suddenly remembered a single, vivid detail from that chaotic time of loss and legal battles. His father, in a moment of drunken remorse, had bitterly lamented the loss of his greatest technical achievement, a revolutionary avionics safety system, which had been finalized right before the partnership dissolved. This extreme event flashed across his memory with stunning clarity. His father had shown him the schematics in their old study, describing the system's unique integration with a new type of helicopter, a military utility craft that was supposed to revolutionize air travel and safety. He'd proudly named the prototype system after his wife, despite their impending divorce, an act of desperate sentimentality. The irony wasn't lost on Elias. The same kind of chopper Kelani had almost flown. He remembered the name his father had used for the project, a name that was strangely absent from all the public documents about the crash. The memory was incomplete, shadowy, but it pointed directly back to the moment his father's company failed and the moment Kelani's career was destroyed. There was a secret connection. Elias leaned back in his leather chair, his fingers steepled under his chin, the arrogance replaced by a consuming suspicion. The business partner who had ousted his father had been a man named Victor Sterling. Victor Sterling. The name Kelani mentioned was Sterling Vance. The similarity was too close to be a coincidence. Elias realized the rot went deeper, far beyond a simple dare. He picked up his phone, canceling his appointments. He suddenly needed to go home, far away from the tower. He needed to talk to the only person who knew the truth about his father's downfall, his grandfather, who was wasting away in a quiet nursing home, waiting to be forgotten. If you're loving this story so far, smash that subscribe button so you don't miss the next story. Kelani Jenkins stood by the grounded helicopter, its imposing presence now a symbol of hidden corruption rather than a mere machine. Elias had left, but the sheer weight of their conversation hung in the air. Kelani couldn't shake the name Sterling Vance, the man who had ruined her life and destroyed her future. She reflected bitterly on the people she had trusted and subsequently lost. Her mother, devastated by the official report, had moved across the country, unable to face the public shame Kelani's name now carried. Her older brother, a successful businessman, had cut ties completely, fearing the damage to his reputation. This was the less extreme event. Kelani's quiet walk through the expansive hangar, stopping only to touch the cold metal of the aircraft skid, remembering a picnic she'd shared with her father years ago. They had eaten greasy burgers and talked about the physics of flight, the simple, powerful connection between them now nothing but a hollow echo. That happy memory was a sharp contrast to the constant, biting pain of her current reality. She had loved them, but their abandonment had been a secondary, cruel punishment. She closed her eyes, and the hangar vanished, replaced by a flash of vivid, heart-stopping terror. The extreme event, a violent, full-sensory flashback, seized her mind. It was the day of the crash. Her father, Major Ben Jenkins, was not just her mentor. He was on board the ill-fated chopper, serving as the senior test observer. He had insisted on joining the mission, wanting to witness his daughter's triumph with the new avionics system. Kelani heard the alarms again, the piercing, mechanical shriek that preceded the fall. She could feel the violent shuddering of the airframe. She remembered her father's voice, calm but urgent, crackling through the headset over the chaos. Kelani, listen to me. It's not the system. I see the logs. It's a structural breach. Get out now. His voice was the last thing she heard before the transmission cut out in a sudden burst of agonizing, high-pitched static. The guilt of failing him, of not reaching him in the chaos, was a physical weight she carried every day. She still saw the severed wires and the look of pure shock on his face right before impact. The memory was devastating, and she was brought to her knees. She gripped the metal skid, tears finally flowing, realizing she had been flying blind against her father's sacrifice. Elias Thorne drove his expensive sedan, not to his opulent mansion, but to a small, dignified nursing home on the outskirts of the city. He rarely visited his grandfather, Howard Thorne, the only man left in his family who possessed any sense of moral integrity. Howard was in his late 70s, sharp-witted but confined to a wheelchair, mostly ignored by the staff and forgotten by the rest of the Thorne dynasty. The less extreme event was their strained conversation in the small, sunlit room. Elias, ever the businessman, spoke about quarterly profits and stock performance. Howard merely nodded, commenting wryly on Elias's inability to talk about anything that wasn't worth millions. Elias finally forced himself to bring up the day's absurdity, describing the homeless woman, the dare, and her terrifyingly accurate diagnosis of the chopper's flaw. He reluctantly confessed the name she had given him, Sterling Vance. As soon as Elias said the name, the room's atmosphere shifted entirely. Howard's hand, which had been resting loosely on the armrest, tightened into a white-knuckled fist. His eyes, usually clouded with age and indifference, suddenly became sharp and piercing, like steel points. He leaned forward, ignoring his grandson's casual business chatter, his voice dropping to a harsh, urgent whisper that demanded immediate attention. Elias, taken aback, stopped talking instantly. The extreme event occurred when Howard, agitated and desperate, spat out a name, a different but terrifyingly familiar name. Victor Sterling, Howard rasped, his face pale and etched with fear. That was the devil who ruined your father and destroyed my company. He was the partner, Elias, the one who took everything. Howard then grabbed Elias's sleeve with surprising strength, pulling him closer, his gaze burning with intensity. That woman, Kelani, Howard continued, struggling for breath. If she knows about a Sterling, she knows about the filth in this family's past. You must listen to her, Elias. That man is pure poison, and he will stop at nothing to bury the truth. Do not trust him or anyone connected to him. He vanished years ago, and I always feared he'd come back. You must protect her. Howard's warning was clear and absolute, suddenly elevating Kelani from a homeless dare to a central figure in a dangerous family conspiracy. Elias left the nursing home in a state of shock, the name Victor Sterling echoing in his mind. The pieces of the puzzle that Kelani had given him were now clicking violently into place with the information from his grandfather. The arrogant CEO, who believed he knew everything about the world, was now faced with a family history steeped in corruption and betrayal that he had only just begun to uncover. The less extreme event was Elias's immediate return to the hangar, where Kelani was still waiting, guarded by the nervous security team. He dismissed them all and approached Kelani, his posture no longer that of a mocking ruler, but of a man deeply troubled and seeking an uneasy partnership. He didn't waste time with formalities. He just stared at her, the question evident in his eyes, searching for confirmation of the terrifying link. Sterling Vance, Elias said, testing the name. Did he ever go by Victor Sterling? Kelani's eyes widened, a flicker of raw recognition crossing her face. That name, Victor, was one she had heard once, whispered by a subordinate shortly before her crash. She had dismissed it then, but now the connection was undeniable. The two names were the same person, confirming his identity as the ultimate architect of her family's ruin. The extreme event that followed was Elias's stunning revelation, dropping a bomb that connected the two shattered lives in a twisted web of corporate malice. Victor Sterling was my father's business partner, Elias admitted, his voice low and heavy with shame. The man who destroyed my father's career and took control of our company. He sold off the avionics division right after the big crash, your crash. And he specifically ordered the very type of helicopter you inspected today. He explained that his father's company, Thorne Avionics, had designed a faulty component that Kelani had found, a component that had been tampered with or poorly designed by Victor Sterling's team. The realization struck Kelani like a physical blow. The man who had ruined her life and caused the death of her father was the very same man who had financially devastated the Thorne family. Their separate miseries were woven together by the threads of a single, powerful villain. The mockery of the dare had unintentionally united two victims against a common enemy. The weight of Elias's revelation settled heavily over Kelani, stripping away her remaining emotional defenses. All the isolation, the pain, the homelessness, it was all rooted in the greedy machinations of one man, a man who had hurt both of them. Seeing the genuine horror and shame on Elias's face, Kelani finally allowed herself to be vulnerable, deciding that this strange, arrogant man might be the only person who could help her fight back. The less extreme event was Kelani's tearful confession, revealing the devastating events leading up to the crash. She described her father's phone call from the chopper minutes before the end, the panic in his voice, and his desperate warning about a structural breach, not a system failure. She confessed that the official report, which branded her as incompetent and reckless, was a calculated lie designed to protect the reputation of the man who sold the flawed hardware, Victor Sterling, the now high-level government contractor. She confessed that she didn't just lose her career, she lost her identity and her ability to fight back against a system that had protected a rich, powerful man. She described searching for proof for someone who cared, only to be dismissed as a grieving, delusional pilot. That failure to clear her name was what ultimately led her to the streets, broken and defeated, convinced the world was against her. The air in the hangar was thick with Kelani's sorrow and Elias's growing realization of the monstrous injustice. The extreme event then came with Kelani's chilling final reveal, the detail that made the betrayal a cold-blooded crime. "My father was going to expose him," she whispered, her voice ragged with pain. He found out that Victor Sterling, Vance, was cutting corners, substituting cheaper, weaker metals on the rotor housing to save millions. My father was killed not in a mere accident, but in a staged corporate execution to cover up Victor's massive fraud. She looked Elias directly in the eyes, her voice hardening. "My father didn't die in the crash. Victor Sterling left him to die in that wreckage to bury the evidence of his crime." Elias was stunned silent, reeling from the realization that his family's former partner was not just corrupt, but a murderer. Kelani's pain was not a tragic accident. It was the direct result of a corporate conspiracy tied to his own legacy. The initial dare, the mockery, now felt like a profound, sickening insult to her father's memory. Elias knew in that instant that his entire purpose had just changed. The immediate shock of Kelani's accusation gave way to Elias Thorne's cold, calculating resolve. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a grim determination. He saw not a homeless woman, but a powerful, brilliant weapon of truth and a chance to redeem his family's name, which Victor Sterling had dragged through the mud. The less extreme event was Elias's solemn offer of partnership. He didn't mention the "marry you" dare. That was a past indignity buried by the gravity of their shared enemy. He offered his entire empire to her cause. "Kelani," he said, using her name with genuine respect for the first time. "You don't fight a viper with a stick. You use a machine gun. I have the resources, the money, the data forensics team, and the security access you need. You just focus on the facts. I'm taking you off the street, and we're going to burn Victor Sterling's entire world down." He then arranged for her to stay in a secure, luxury apartment downtown, instructing his personal staff to buy her clothes and supplies, not as charity, but as equipment for an essential, high-stakes mission. Kelani accepted, not with gratitude, but with the quiet dignity of a general accepting reinforcements. She knew the fight was far from over, but for the first time in a year, she wasn't fighting alone. The extreme event came when Elias took Kelani to a secure, underground office near the harbor. This wasn't the main corporate office. It was a private, clandestine space used for sensitive corporate warfare. He introduced her to a specialized legal team, a group of quiet, intensely focused individuals who specialized in complex corporate fraud and military cover-ups. They were the best money could buy, veterans of high-stakes court battles. Elias presented the team with the evidence, The names Sterling Vance and Victor Sterling, the chopper's structural flaw, the timing of her father's death, and his grandfather's testimony. He laid out a plan to begin digging through 20 years of Victor Sterling's transactions, looking for the corruption that started with his father's company. He made a mistake, Elias told Kelani, his voice hard. He thought the black homeless woman on the street was just collateral damage. Now, Captain Jenkins, you're going to prove him wrong. The revenge was officially in motion, and the stakes were higher than either of them could imagine. If you're loving this story so far, share this video with someone that needs to watch this video. With Elias Thorne's vast, if cold, resources now at her disposal, Kelani's transformation began immediately. It wasn't just about appearances. It was about reclaiming the self-respect that the streets had stripped away. The less extreme event was the full makeover. New, well-fitting clothes that felt comfortable and professional, a sharp, modern haircut that emphasized her high cheekbones and determined eyes, and a quiet, secure apartment where she could finally sleep without the fear of the night. She looked like the powerful engineer she had always been, but with the added depth of a person who had seen the absolute worst of the world and survived. This physical change fueled an internal resurrection. She walked taller, spoke with clearer authority, and her mind, freed from the constant, crushing burden of survival, focused entirely on the coming fight. The woman Elias mocked days ago was gone, replaced by a polished, focused warrior. Elias, watching her during a strategy meeting, found himself seeing her not as a homeless person, nor as a potential wife, but as the formidable partner he desperately needed. The change in her demeanor was shocking, a testament to the power of security and purpose. The extreme event occurred when Elias decided to introduce her to his estranged grandfather, Howard Thorne. This was risky. Elias rarely allowed anyone into that part of his life, especially not someone who was once an outsider. He drove Kelani far outside the city to the luxurious but lonely nursing home where Howard lived, telling her only that his grandfather held a piece of their mutual puzzle. Howard Thorne was the one person who carried the deep, shameful secrets of the Thorne family, and he had been waiting for them. When they entered the room, Howard's frail eyes immediately locked onto Kelani, ignoring Elias entirely. He studied her face, not with pity or judgment, but with an intense, agonizing recognition that made Kelani's skin crawl. He took her hand, his touch surprisingly strong, and apologized for the pain his family had caused, admitting his son, Elias's father, had made terrible mistakes. Then, he delivered the shock. He confessed that he knew all about Victor Sterling's original plot, but had been powerless to stop it after his own son's betrayal. He told Kelani that he had been holding on to something for years, something he hoped would one day bring justice. The confrontation with the past was terrifyingly real, pulling Kelani deeper into the Thorne family's web of guilt and secrets. Howard Thorne insisted on privacy, shooing Elias to the corner of the room with a wave of his hand. He looked at Kelani, his eyes pleading for her to trust him. The less extreme event was the passing of the metal box. Howard reached under his bed and pulled out a small, heavy, steel lockbox about the size of a jewelry case, its surface scratched and dull with age. He explained that he had found it tucked away in an old safe belonging to Elias's father, shortly after Victor Sterling vanished following Kelani's crash. Howard couldn't open it. The security was too advanced, locked by a combination only the true owner or a brilliant engineer would know. Howard handed the box to Kelani, the weight of it feeling significant in her hands. He told her he believed the box contained the true evidence, the proof that Victor Sterling had orchestrated the whole thing. Kelani took the box, feeling a strange mix of hope and terror. This was not a military mission. This was a personal crusade, and the evidence was finally within her grasp. She knew immediately that the lock was a complex digital cipher, requiring specific knowledge of Thorne avionics security protocols she had studied years ago. The extreme event occurred moments later. Back in the private car, speeding toward the city, Kelani worked on the box. She had Elias input a series of numerical constants related to her father's mission, fuel consumption rates, flight telemetry codes, and a unique atmospheric pressure variable her father often used. The lock clicked open with a satisfying metallic sound. Inside, beneath layers of protective foam, lay the shocking proof. Kehlani pulled out 2 items. The first was a prototype microchip, small, dark, and highly specialized, clearly labeled with the Thorn Avionics logo and marked Rotor Stabilization System V3. This was the very microchip that should have been installed in her chopper, the cutting-edge piece of safety gear that the official report claimed had failed, but was never actually in the aircraft. Victor Sterling must have removed it. The second item was even more explosive, a small, hidden compartment at the base of the box, containing a single, tightly folded piece of paper, a handwritten letter, yellowed with age. The evidence was secured, but the story was about to get much darker. Kehlani unfolded the handwritten letter, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Elias watched her, the tension in the car so thick it was almost suffocating. The less extreme event was Kehlani reading the letter, which wasn't from her father, but from Elias's father, written months before the crash. It was a panicked, self-pitying confession detailing a vicious, secret business dispute with Victor Sterling, the same man who was later identified as Sterling Vance. The letter detailed how Victor, the business partner, had become increasingly hostile and erratic. Elias's father confessed to a massive financial oversight, a cover-up that Victor had discovered. But the letter didn't stop there. Elias's father wrote that Victor was using that financial mistake to force him out of the company, and that he was willing to use any dirty tactic necessary to secure complete control of the defense contracts, including compromising the new chopper safety certification. The extreme event then came in a final, devastating paragraph, revealing the true, shocking motive behind the sabotage. The letter confirmed that Victor Sterling had planned to blackmail Elias's father with evidence of his infidelity and financial fraud, threatening to release the information publicly. The letter revealed that Elias's father was desperate, contemplating suicide over the shame and the financial ruin. However, he also confessed that Victor had offered him a twisted deal. Frame Kehlani's father, Major Ben Jenkins, by tampering with the chopper's structural components, making the ensuing tragedy look like a component failure. Victor had guaranteed that Kehlani's father would be killed in the staged accident, and the blame would fall on the Major's flight assessment, thereby securing the lucrative military contracts and silencing Kehlani's father, who had stumbled upon the full extent of Victor's fraud. Elias's father had initially refused the monstrous offer, but the panic in the letter was palpable. The letter stopped abruptly, leaving Kehlani and Elias with the horrifying realization that Elias's father was either directly complicit in the betrayal or had been unable to stop Victor Sterling from framing her father as a scapegoat. The chilling contents of the letter left Kehlani and Elias reeling, but the shock quickly solidified into shared purpose. They now had the motive, the evidence, the microchip, and the means to connect Victor Sterling to murder and corporate fraud. The less extreme event began as Kehlani, invigorated by the truth, began rigorous pilot training again. Elias used his private simulator, a $1 million machine locked away in his penthouse, for Kehlani to practice emergency procedures and high-stress flying. Kehlani's military precision returned with alarming speed. She moved through the air like a phantom, her hands instinctively knowing the controls. The training was less about physical skill and more about mental conditioning, overcoming the trauma of the past. She flew hour after hour, pushing the simulator to its limits, mastering every single maneuver. Elias watched, mesmerized by her sheer competence. She wasn't just good, she was the best he had ever seen. The time spent training was a quiet, necessary period of healing and preparation, the calm before the coming storm. The extreme event struck when their legal team, led by Elias's ruthless chief counsel, tracked Victor Sterling to a private military installation in a remote part of Arizona. He was now a high-level government official overseeing defense logistics, the ultimate hiding place. The team discovered that Victor Sterling had acquired a small fleet of specialized, unmarked choppers secured under a non-disclosure contract. Their forensics specialist intercepted a communication that revealed Victor Sterling was preparing for a critical, high-value transfer that he deemed untraceable. The communication, broken into coded snippets, revealed that Victor Sterling knew they were getting close. He wasn't running. He was waiting. He had set up an elaborate, personalized trap. The intercepted message contained a GPS coordinate and a chilling phrase. The prize awaits the pilot who dares to land. Victor Sterling had the stolen funds and the final piece of evidence Kalani needed, but she would have to fly into his fortress to get it. He had his own chopper waiting for them, a modified, armed military transport, proving that the game was now deadly and entirely on his terms. Kalani and Elias knew they couldn't involve the police yet. Victor Sterling's position and influence would ensure the evidence was buried before they could secure it. The only way to win was to walk into his trap and use Kalani's superior flying skills and knowledge of the aircraft against him. They traveled to the remote airfield in Arizona, the silence and the high-end SUV heavy with anticipation. The less extreme event was the chilling approach. The airfield was deserted, guarded only by high-tech sensors and drones humming lazily in the scorching desert air. Victor Sterling's choice of location, a place of absolute isolation, was designed to remind them that here, no one could hear them scream. They found a single, high-spec military transport helicopter waiting, its dark paint gleaming in the sun. As Kalani performed a quick visual check, she confirmed it was a heavily modified version of the same airframe that had been responsible for her father's death. This was a direct psychological attack. The extreme event began the moment they climbed into the cockpit. As Kalani initiated the startup sequence, the navigation screen flickered to life, showing not a map, but the face of Victor Sterling himself. He looked older, more powerful, a sickening picture of ruthless success. He was sitting in an opulent office miles away, clearly enjoying their fear. "Welcome, Captain Jenkins," Victor drawled, his voice a smooth, venomous whisper piped directly into their headset. "I knew you couldn't resist a good machine." He chuckled, a dry, cruel sound. "I saw your little scene in the city. Tell you what, I'll still give you the prize. Fly this chopper to the designated coordinates of a lovely little abandoned silo in Nevada. Deliver the case I've loaded in the back, and you get everything you want, the truth, your name, and maybe even my final mercy." He paused, his smile widening into a terrifying grin as he delivered the final, life-or-death ultimatum. "Refuse, and my team will remotely activate the countermeasure system I installed in this bird. It's quite the spectacular fireworks show, and Elias Thorne here will be the only one left to frame for your disappearance." They were flying into a trap with a hidden bomb, and Victor Sterling was holding the detonator. If you're loving this story so far, smash that like button and let us know with a fire emoji in the comments. Kalani's blood ran cold as Victor Sterling's smug face disappeared from the screen, leaving them alone in the humming cockpit. The briefcase, the supposed cargo, lay innocent-looking on the floor, but she knew it was a distraction. The less extreme event began as a desperate, frantic search for the hidden bomb. She knew Victor Sterling well enough to know he wouldn't leave anything to chance. Elias worked frantically with the comms panel, trying to scramble the GPS signal and bypass the remote detonation sequence. Kalani ignored his efforts, focusing instead on the schematics of the modified airframe. Using the memory of her father and her own training, she accessed the chopper's maintenance logs through the hidden engineer interface. She realized the horrifying truth. The self-destruct mechanism wasn't a separate bomb. It was woven into the aircraft's very systems, tied to the same flawed rotor housing that Victor Sterling had compromised years ago. The detonation was programmed to trigger not when she landed, but when the pressure sensor on the landing gear reached zero, meaning the moment they touched down, they would be vaporized. The extreme event was Kalani's rapid, calculated improvisation. She realized Victor Sterling didn't want the money in the briefcase. He wanted a spectacular, untraceable explosion that would eliminate his two biggest threats and frame Elias for the final act of corporate espionage. Kalani couldn't land, but she couldn't stay in the air forever. She barked orders at Elias, telling him to disconnect the landing gear pressure sensor now. The wiring was deep within the floor panel, a complicated mess of high-tension cables. Elias, despite his lack of technical training, grabbed the toolkit and tore into the paneling, struggling against the chopper's violent vibrations. As he finally located the wires, the voice of Victor Sterling cut back into the cockpit, laced with menace. Landing gear engaging in 30 seconds, Captain. Enjoy the view. Kehlani flew the chopper into a tight, impossible turn, trying to shake his remote signal, but she knew the end was imminent. Elias had seconds to cut the wires before Victor's system locked down the landing sequence and ensured their demise. With Victor Sterling taunting them over the radio, Elias worked under impossible pressure, sweat stinging his eyes. The less extreme event was the near miss. As he fumbled with the cutting tool, the landing gear warning light flashed red. Kehlani held the chopper steady, talking him through the wires, their lives depending entirely on his focus and her skill. Finally, with a sharp snap, the critical wires severed. The warning light vanished, but Victor's voice roared back, enraged and shocked. "You fools! You think that changes anything? I have the world's ears." He cackled, a chilling, triumphant sound that echoed through the desert air. The extreme event unfolded as Elias's grandfather, Howard Thorne, and Elias's trusted legal team executed their brilliant counterplan. They were miles away, at a different location, having anticipated Victor Sterling's need for an audience. They knew Victor would want to gloat, to witness Kehlani's final failure and announce his false victory. As Kehlani performed evasive maneuvers in the chopper, Victor, convinced she was still minutes from the trap, activated a live, high-resolution feed to what he believed were secured government channels. Victor began his public confession, speaking calmly and professionally about the sad, inevitable failure of the rogue pilot Kehlani Jenkins and the desperate criminal acts of the disgraced EO, Elias Thorne. He confessed to clearing his name by managing consequences, detailing the sabotage of the original airframe, the framing of Kehlani's father, and his ascension to power through deception. However, the legal team had infiltrated the broadcast feed. Instead of broadcasting to secured government channels, Victor's chilling, boastful confession was live-streamed directly onto global news networks and social media platforms. The entire world heard the truth, raw and unedited, from Victor Sterling's own mouth, turning his moment of triumph into his complete and public downfall. Victor Sterling's confession ended abruptly as his security team burst into his remote broadcast studio, realizing the scale of the infiltration. The news channels exploded with breaking reports, plastering Victor Sterling's face and his detailed, chilling admissions across every screen. For Kehlani and Elias, still flying high above the desert, the less extreme event was the sudden, satisfying silence of the headset. Victor was finally off the air. Kehlani, however, remained focused, knowing they were still flying a compromised, stolen helicopter. They flew toward a small, secure military base that Elias had secretly arranged to cooperate with, a place where the chopper could be recovered and the forensic evidence secured. As they landed safely, the ground was instantly swarming with military police and federal agents. The extreme event was the physical, final confrontation. The agents informed them that Victor Sterling had been apprehended, taken into custody immediately after his broadcast concluded. Minutes later, Howard Thorne arrived, his face tired but peaceful, having witnessed the total redemption of his family's name. The military police, however, presented Kehlani and Elias with a startling piece of evidence recovered from Victor Sterling's primary office, a final, signed confession addressed to Kehlani. In the confession, Victor Sterling admitted to tampering with the original airframe to create the structural breach that killed Kehlani's father. He confirmed that Major Ben Jenkins had discovered his fraudulent scheme to use cheaper materials and was preparing to go public, forcing Victor to order the deadly, staged accident. The confession secured everything. Kehlani's name was formally cleared of the pilot error charge, and her father was recognized as a hero who died trying to expose massive corporate and government corruption. The dust settled quickly, leaving behind a profound sense of justice and exhausted relief. Victor Sterling's empire crumbled overnight, facing charges of murder, fraud, and treason. The less extreme event was the quiet, sacred moment Kelani had waited for. Elias took her to a national cemetery, standing by her side as she visited her father's grave. The official stone was gone, replaced by a newly etched marker that read, "Major Ben Jenkins, pilot and hero, died protecting the truth." Kelani stood there, finally allowing the grief to pass, knowing her father's sacrifice was recognized. The sense of peace was overwhelming. Kelani was no longer homeless. She was an icon of resilience, a highly decorated veteran whose unjust disgrace had become a global symbol of overcoming corporate evil. The extreme event was Elias's public announcement, broadcast from the very plaza where he had initially mocked her. He stood on a stage, addressing the global audience, his voice devoid of the old arrogance. He apologized deeply and sincerely for his initial cruelty and confessed the complicated, indirect role his family's past had played in Kelani's tragedy. But he didn't stop there. As a path to genuine redemption, he announced the immediate establishment of the Major Ben Jenkins Integrity Foundation, a multi-billion-dollar fund dedicated to providing legal and financial resources to service members and whistleblowers who were unjustly disgraced by corporate or government corruption. Elias announced Kelani Jenkins as the foundation's inaugural CEO and chairman. The cruel mockery of the dare had been reversed. Kelani had won not a marriage, but the power to ensure justice for countless others. Kelani was now the CEO, but her office wasn't in a sterile skyscraper. It was in the heart of the foundation's headquarters, surrounded by the faces of veterans whose lives she was changing. The less extreme event was a quiet moment between her and Elias. They stood on the balcony overlooking the city, their relationship having transformed from enemies to reluctant partners to deeply respectful, loyal allies. Elias gently reminded her of his initial, cruel dare, "Fly this chopper and I'll marry you." He looked at her, his voice soft. "The offer was stupid, insulting, and rooted in my own cynicism. But what we found was better than any marriage, Kelani. It was a partnership of justice, purpose, and respect." He smiled, a genuine, warm expression that had replaced his permanent sneer. "You didn't need my name, and I didn't need your approval. We just needed the truth." The extreme event, the final, poetic scene, brought the story full circle. Weeks later, Kelani prepared for a flight. Not in a military transport, but in the exact model of the Thorne-owned helicopter from Chapter 1, now fully repaired and bearing the subtle insignia of the Jenkins Integrity Foundation. As she prepared for takeoff, she adjusted the controls, the very ones she had helped design, with a confident, calm focus. Kelani didn't fly to a corporate meeting. She flew the gleaming black chopper to a community center in a tough, underprivileged neighborhood, where dozens of aspiring young black girls and boys waited. She landed the chopper gently in the park, the rotors slowing to a stop. She stepped out, no longer the homeless woman, but the hero, the pilot, the CEO, the commander. She stood tall, a powerful symbol of resilience and truth. Her past hadn't destroyed her. It had forged her into a force for good. The story ends with her looking at the eager faces, her voice ringing with a hard-won message that the greatest revenge is not a cruel act, but a life lived with unwavering kindness, empathy, and purpose. If Kelani's incredible journey from tragedy to triumph inspired you, hit that like button right now. Drop a comment below and tell us, what moment of betrayal turned into your greatest victory? And don't forget to subscribe to see more powerful, emotional stories like this one every week.